Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. A lot of politicians are legends in their own mind. We have a genuine legend with us today. He was the Attorney General of Michigan for 37 years. That is still a national record. He got elected 10 times. He averaged more than 61% of the vote. I think that makes him a legend. And he has now written his autobiography, a terrific read. We're going to talk about it. I want to introduce to you Frank Kelley.
Well, thank you, bro. My pleasure to be with you.
And you just told me not to call you General, so I'm going to call you Frank.
Please.
First of all, I want to express my condolences on the loss of your lovely wife, Nancy.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Since this program was scheduled, she suddenly passed away, and I've got that personal situation to deal with. But she would have wanted me to carry on my schedule. Yeah. A little difficult, but I'm carrying on, and that's why we're here today. And I really appreciate the opportunity.
You know, your schedule over the years had to be really challenging for you. Yeah. I mean, you're one of the hardest working guys in politics. Well, where did you get the energy?
Well, the thing about it is, very few people get into a line of work where they loved it and they were happy every minute. From the time I struggled and I had a wife and child, had to go to night school to get through law school and everything. I did it the hard way. But the day they swore me in as a lawyer, from that day forward, Burl, 60-some years ago, I've been happy. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I thought I'd be good and useful and productive at it. And I've been happy every day. And so I considered anything I did as a lawyer not work. And so if I had to put in 35, 40 hours a week in the law office, and then go out at night on the road, as you do, appearances, speeches, all that sort of thing, it never bothered me because I was happy. And I hope some of your listeners out there have a job or an occupation that keeps them happy. It's not money or anything like that. If you're doing something you like, you're a very lucky person. Yeah. And I was always that way.
You know, you can also inspire, I think, some people who've gotten through law school and didn't make it through the bar right away.
Oh, yeah.
Was that tough for you?
Oh, yeah. What happened is I was a fairly good student, not the greatest, but I was a good student. But I was a nervous type. And what happened was when I took the bar exam the first time, I got over emotional and I got, over anxious during the exam. And I either flopped up or didn't answer about 3 or 4 questions on the bar, and that caused me to fail by 1 or 2 questions, But it was okay because Phil Hart called me the next day, the famous senator. Yeah. And he said, Frank, I got graduated from the University of Michigan, Order of the Coif, which is the highest scholastic rating one could have. And he said, I took the bar and failed. He said, don't feel bad. So I was okay. I took it the second time, calmed down, and was fine. But, I try to be honest with people. It wasn't a smooth path. I had a few difficulties along the way.
One of the things I learned about you, which I suppose if people had lived in Michigan their whole lives would have known, but I got here in '94. I didn't know about your dad. I didn't know that your dad was the most celebrated speakeasy keeper in the city of Detroit, and how ironic that you would end up on the right side of the law.
Yeah, well, the Irish back in the 20s, the Irish community of Detroit, and a lot of other people, Prohibition was passed while the boys were overseas in 1918. It wasn't very popular, but there was a certain element of society thought liquor was the cause of all evil. The Irish didn't believe in that. and Irish Americans, and most people in Detroit didn't do it. So actually, that was one law you could violate with impunity, you know. And at one time in Detroit in the 1920s, there were 200 illegal little bars, 200 in Detroit. And my dad had one of them, but it was a larger one, a big enterprise, as described in the book, called the Linden Hunt and Fish Club, and it was like a nightclub. And guess what? People didn't realize Sherman Billingsley and other people in New York, they had the same thing. And later they became famous for their nightclub, but during the 20s, they were operating these speakeasies. But don't get me wrong, my dad was not an underworld type or anything like that. He thought that was, you know, a misapplied law, and he was okay to do it. But my dad was, you know, he was against gambling or any kind of real crime. And he always raised me, you know, to be honest and so on. He wouldn't condone anything else, but he didn't think that was wrong. So then to show you that they had a good reputation, in 1933, you know, it became legal to have, they threw out prohibition. And Governor Comstock was a Democratic governor that went in with Roosevelt, and Pat O'Brien was an attorney general from the Upper Peninsula. And prior to that time, Democrats never won anything for years. But they knew who my father was. And so Pat O'Brien went to the governor and says, we got to give liquor licenses out. And he said to the governor, I want to give one of the first ones to Frank Kelly. And I said, why? Comstock didn't know my dad. So, okay, but why? He said, because he happens to be a real nice guy, and he knows more about running a bar than anybody else. So my dad got one of the first liquor licenses in 1933, and then he had a fairly nice bar in Grand River near Joy Road, and which he operated almost till the time he died. Yeah, but that shows you the contrast.
Right.
That he had a good, and then he went into politics. And in 1940, we're on television today, and in 1948 it was a rather new thing. And 1940, it was the first year that national television televised the national conventions. And the Democratic convention was in Philadelphia. And my father had risen in political significance to be chairman of the Michigan delegation of the national convention. So here he's on television, gray-haired like me, and the camera would come by, casting Michigan's votes for Harry S. Truman at the convention. So he did convert to a respected political career, and then out of that, he was made chairman of the Board of Institutions in Detroit, and then he was made as chairman, and they ran Eloise Hospital, which was the largest mental hospital in the state. So my dad was a compassionate head of that, plus being in political activity. But I think it comes out in the book. He was not some underworld character.
Right.
And he was the inspiration of my life. And
he knew so many celebrities. Did you meet some of them when you were growing up?
Oh, yeah. I met, Jack Dempsey when he was imagine Jack Dempsey in the 20s. Came to my dad's place, Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, people like that. Sammy Mandel was lightweight champion of the world. I said Jack Dempsey. And he had a real nice play. And Babe Ruth, when he came to town, he would come to my dad's place before the game, like at 11 o'clock in the morning, because they always had a free lunch.
Yeah. And he liked to eat.
Yeah, and then my dad would have about 3 hot dogs for him. And he would eat 3 hot dogs and then go beat the Detroit Tigers. My dad had mixed feelings about that. So I did meet those celebrities. And then, of course, when I became Attorney General, I was always open to that sort of thing. So I met a lot of people. And it's all in the book.
And you start the book out with one of those people, a phone call from the Attorney General, Robert F. Kennedy. Tell me about your relationship with the Kennedys.
Well, Bob, I was appointed. I never ran for political office. And I was attorney in Alpena, and the governor appointed me because a committee was going to be controversy-free in filling the vacancy in the office of Attorney General. So I came through a committee process, and the governor appointed me. And I'm in my office a couple weeks after being in Alpena, Michigan, sitting in a big office down here as Attorney General. And I get a call from Bobby Kennedy, Attorney General of the United States. And, I'm really impressed. And the reason why he called was I was Irish, like he, Irish American. I was the same political party, and I was new, and he'd only been Attorney General a few months. He was younger than I was, you know. So he called me, and he obviously wanted a political ally and friendship with me. So he said, congratulations, so a few words. He said, come down and see me in Washington. We'll talk about cooperation. So that's what I did. I took my deputy, we flew to Washington, and the first chapter of the book is my interview with Bobby Kennedy, you know. And I have to tell your audience that a lot of these people's public images, I know because I knew them. Some people had a public image of being really nice and oh, you thought they were wonderful, and they weren't very nice and they weren't very wonderful. Bobby Kennedy had an image of being sometimes a little hard, a little tough, a little strident, but if he liked you, he was just a warm, nice guy. And he wasn't anything like your image of Mr. Tough Guy. He wasn't like that. Like he'd put his arm around me, things like that, and walk me out. When we got done, he felt like I knew him well, and he walked me out of his office. It's all in the book, how nice he treated me. And because of that, because I would have had a soft spot for the Kennedys anyway, but then because they knew me from then on, I had a chance to spend time with John Kennedy and quite a bit of time with Ted Kennedy, and quite a bit of it's in the book, I hope. And
Ted Kennedy, of course, was the dean of the Senate, but more and more we hear about he could have been president.
Yeah.
But some of it was personal, wasn't it? That he had a drinking problem.
Yeah. You know, I'm Irish, and my father was a wonderful guy. They were poor Irish from Detroit, a big family. My dad's mother died when he was 13 of childbirth fever, and nobody even knows what that is anymore. That was because midwives and doctors in those days didn't wash their hands. Yeah. And a Frenchman by the name of Pasteur said, there's bacteria, you got to wash your hands. And it was just the same. We're the same today if we were that. What do those Frenchmen know? So we didn't pay attention to it. And as a result, 40 or 50,000 women a year died of childbirth fever. My grandmother died of it when she was 38 years old. And then my grandfather, who worked at Detroit Brass Works, was hit in the stomach by a machine, and he died on the job. And so my father and his brothers were orphaned when they were still youngsters, you know. And there were 5 boys, and one became a vice president of personnel at Ford Motor Company. My dad was always successful. And another uncle had a Kelly Sausage Company, was always successful. And there were 2 other brothers. One had a genius IQ and everything. They actually died, Burl, laying in the street in the drunken section of Detroit, laying in the street, drunkards. They were found dead. And you can imagine, and in the same family, the point of Irish have a terrible weakness towards that sort of thing. And 2 of my uncles, and I loved them when they were nice. But my dad was able to control that. And he always preached to me to never do it because he didn't want me to have the Irish curse. And so fortunately, I was always able to handle it. I never drank much in my whole life because of the experience with my uncle.
Yeah. You served under, actually, I just used the wrong word because you made a big point of this. I was going to say you served under Governor Milliken, but you didn't really serve under anybody. And tell us the story about you and Governor Romney.
Well, you know, I was Attorney General under Governor Swainson, Governor Romney, Governor Milliken, Governor Blanchard, and Governor Engler. And you folks remember some of them, that you couldn't get 5 more diverse personalities. Mm-hmm. Every one of them was in how they felt about things was different. But Michigan was I was there. Michigan is very lucky because every one of those men, despite any difference I may have, was 100% honest and devoted to being a public servant and devoted to keeping everything honest. But the hardest one who had the hardest adjustment, Swainson, the first governor, had been a senator and was experienced in politics. Milliken had been a senator, state senator, experienced in politics. His father and grandfather had all been state senators from Traverse City. And then Blanchard worked for me out of law school and was in Congress, experienced. And then Engler had been in the legislature for about 20. Romney came right from big business. And so he thought I was the Attorney General. He thought I would be like a lawyer for American Motor. He'd push a button, come in, and start ordering me around. and that didn't work. And so I tried to explain to him, Attorney General is not like a corporation lawyer. You're one of my clients, but the Attorney General is attorney for the legislature, legislative branch of government, executive branch of government, and not too many people know, the Attorney General is actually attorney for the judiciary. And so he's supposed to be the attorney for all branches of government. And he or she is to see that the laws are enforced, and he's the legal advisor to anybody legitimate in government who wants advice. And then he ought to defend the state against all lawsuits, plus sue on behalf of the state for any wrongs they have. So that was a lot.
How'd you work things out with him?
Well, with Governor Romney, there was kind of, there was some arguments behind closed doors. I want you to do this, I want you to, and I told him, look, I'm not some corporation lawyer. I was elected the same day you. I have constitutional duties, and you have to understand it. Well, we had fortunately, he had people on his staff who were experienced in government and knew my side of the argument. So what we finally did, and it's all in the book, we finally agreed, and he agreed as a gentleman, that we would have his trusted lawyer and my trusted lawyer work out an agreement as to what the duties of the governor are, what the duties of the Attorney General are, and we would agree to it. And we did that, and we sent it over to him. He signed it, and my people called it the truce of Lansing, and it's a matter of history. And so anytime after that, I always got along with the Attorney General, with the governor, because the governor all knew about the history with Romney, and they all knew about what the duties were as far as the Attorney General was concerned. So I never had any trouble.
You as you said, served with 5 governors. So who was the best?
Well, that's one thing you learn. I've been a lawyer up for 60 years. There's no best in anything. It's like saying to me, "What was your best case?" It's like if you ask a baker, "What was your best cake?" He had a lot of cakes, and I had a lot of cases, and I had a lot of clients. And what I learned, and through my dad was, and this is a good line, it's in the book, about my dad taught me, any darn fool can make enemies, which most people are good at. It takes a clever person to make and keep friends. And so I had been up in Alpena, Michigan, as a Democrat in a small rural town. There were 19 lawyers in the county. My partner and I were the only Democrats in the county. But I wound up, all my clients were Republicans. And then the mayor and council of Alpena, in a small town, came to me after I made a reputation as a lawyer up there. They appointed me city attorney, which is a part-time job. They were all Republicans. I said, well, you can't appoint me. It wouldn't be politically correct. And they looked, I'll never forget the mayor. He said, we given that thought too? I said, well, what was your thought, Mr. Mayor? He said, you take care of the law, we'll take care of the politics, and we'll get along just fine. I was city attorney from that time on until I got appointed attorney general. But that was a part-time job, and I was able to practice law. But in that experience, I learned to get along with people. And so all 5 governors and I socially got along, even though we had diametric different ideals, And Swings and I were kind of close politically and believed in a free government, a free enterprise system, but we believe the government has a role to play in regulating and making sure the game's honest and that the people, the workers, are taken care of. And then came Romney, who was more pro-business, and he figured if you took care of business, they'll take care of everything else. Kind of the trickle-down theory. But he was 100% honest and very serious about civil rights. And then came Bill Milliken, who was a Yale Republican, what you call a liberal Republican, and a progressive Republican. A little more, he believed in protecting business, but not quite as much. He believed in taking care of workers. And he believed strongly in civil rights and so on, as his father had before him. And so we got along fine. I got along. And then came Blanchard, who was a protege of mine. It's all in the book. So we got along fine. And he was a Democrat, but he too believed in, a free enterprise system, and business and so on should be wonderful, but they have to be regulated because a corporation, I hate to tell your audience, but I hate to tell you that some people don't realize every corporation is given permission to operate from the state. They're state regulated to begin with. And people that think that they're all private businesses have nothing to do with the government. The government created corporations, and it also gave each corporation the right to you invest in a corporation, and if the corporation goes broke, you're not personally liable. That was the reason for corporations, so you wouldn't have individual liability. That meant that more people would invest and create corporations. Well, it was governmental from the beginning, and those of us who are Democrats, we believe you had a duty to regulate corporations, and you had a duty to make sure that they treated their workers right. And more conservative people think, well, no, the government doesn't have to do anything. We'll just let business take care of everything. Well, it doesn't work that way in my judgment. But Milliken was not quite that way, a little bit, more conservative. And then came Blanchard, who was a very progressive-minded guy, and we got along wonderful. And then came John Engler, and I kidded in some interview just recently. He never met a corporation he didn't like, and he loved big business. And even though he was in government from the time he was at Michigan State, he had every post in government. He still believed that the government should leave big business alone, just leave them alone. And of course, I just explained why you shouldn't. But on a personal basis, I would go into him like when we first got elected to each other, I'd go to his office and we'd talk for a minute, a little of just politeness. I'd say, you and I don't agree on much of anything, Governor. What can we agree on? And so he said, let's think. So he was against capital punishment. So I said, okay, so am I. That's one thing we can disagree on. And he was against gambling. John Engler did not believe in gambling, and neither did I. So there are two things we can agree on. We can talk about that anytime. All the other stuff, we'll have to be more careful and so on. But whatever he wanted to do, if it was legal, I was there to back him up. So it's in the book, but after the first year of he and I being Attorney General, and he was governor, he was so shocked that I was fair with him. For example, he sold the state accident fund. I would never have sold it. But in making the sale, I made sure we got the most money and everything was done. Yeah. He was all shocked at that. So at the end of the first year in government, when he had a party for all his employees, he spent the first 8 minutes talking about me. How shocked he was that I was a fair-minded guy. And so on a personal basis, we always respect each other, even though we didn't agree on much.
Well, you talk about not leaving government alone, and you certainly did not. You led the way among attorneys general in the nation on consumer protection.
Yeah.
Well, how did that become so important to you?
Well, it's in the book. I had when I got the job, I had a few dedicated people who I respected. One is a woman lawyer by the name of Maxine Virtue, an honor graduate of Yale, and had been a distinguished law clerk for distinguished judges in the East. But her husband, who was a PhD, it's tough getting some jobs. He was in English or something. He got a job at Eastern Michigan University down in Ann Arbor. So she moved with him. And then she got a job in the Attorney General's office a few months before I became Attorney General. Well, she was an idealistic woman, and I loved her and respected her. So she pushed me into consumer, getting interested. This Attorney General's office, we could do wonders in helping people. And then she told me how we could do it by intervening in cases and taking actions and doing it. So she got me interested, and that's how I got it. And then in the environment was the same thing. I wanted to protect the environment, but I also had younger lawyers who says, well, this is how we do it, and we get into it, and we do it. And so I was one of the first Attorney Generals to sue big corporations for pollution and win. And so as a result of that, other Attorney Generals, all kinds of Attorney Generals, are conservative ones and progressive ones, and the ones that were of the progressive type, they started copying me. California, New York, places like that. But the more conservative ones, we were all good friends.
Have your successors in that office carried on with consumer protection? Are you pleased?
Well, I put it to the people out there this way. My decision was that after my big career, that I would never second guess, criticize, or talk about my successors. My theory was this: my era is over. I had my deal. I did my things, and you judge me by it, or historians judge me by it. I didn't want to be the critic or kind of pain in the neck about my successors. And so I never said anything. And I feel that's the job of the media and people who cover those things to say, well, you know, Frank Kelley did this and did that, and then compare the others and make the judgments as to it. I don't make any judgments about it because, number one, if I did, I would sound prejudiced. I would, whether I wanted to.
It sounds small.
I would sound like a narrow-minded guy who thought he was better than anybody else. So I've stayed away from it. Succeeding me were Jennifer Granholm, I think Attorney General Cox was it, and Bill Schuette, and I would just never, on a personal basis, they were all friends of mine, and we're not friendly, but I never talked about their work, and I never said anything, and I won't. It's up to others to do that, and I think it's a fair thing to do.
Yeah, the Democrats have been in a slump for a while.
Yeah.
What is changing in Michigan that the Democrats cannot seem to get back into power?
Well, it's kind of complicated, but it can be explained. The people that, you know, they got a degree in political science or something. It's hard for the average person out there to understand. But what happens is, if you just took raw figures on Democrats versus Republicans, the Democrats are 20 or 22% more of the voters are Democrats. Number one, the Democrats are less disciplined, and they tend to vote in far less numbers, you know. So what happens is the Democrats get out in the big elections and the presidential elections, they get out. But the next 2 years later, when they elect the governor, there could be 20, 30% less of them. And so people get elected governor 2 years later, would never get elected when all of them were out. And so the Republicans would win the off-year elections and have for years, even though they represented a minority of the people. And what they did, because they got the elections and control of the Michigan legislature, they were in charge of apportionment. And so they set up the districts so that the Republicans had more advantage than the Democrats in the way it was set up. For example, the congressional district here in Lansing, you would think with a university and all this sort of kind of progressive attitude around a university that we would have our own congressman here. Well, no, because the legislature, in apportioning it, because they won those off-year elections, they run the congressional district 2 or 3 counties up in the Republican areas and then down to give the votes 12% more Republican vote. And that's what they call malapportionment, or, you know, and so there's that sort of thing. But if you get into it, you'll understand it if you study it. I don't go into it much in the book because it's kind of complicated. But I think that's what's happened. So the conclusion is very simple, that the Democrats have the most votes, but because of the way the elections operate, they never get their voice heard properly. And the Republicans, who really have less votes, win the strategic elections and control the techniques of politics. They control the apportionment, and that's why they manage to be in charge of the Senate and the House now.
All right. Unfortunately, Frank, we are out of time.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, time flew by. It's a delight to have you here. Thank you very much. The book is terrific. It's a quick read and wonderful stories, and I think it really captures the essence of the man. Frank Kelley, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much. My pleasure, Burl.
My pleasure.